The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Hello folks, welcome back to Leicestershire again, and this week we're beginning a brand new district. In fact, it's the only district of Leicestershire we have not yet started. So, where are we? Well, I'm on a little lane here which leads to the A47. This is the parish of Leicester Forest West. Leicester Forest West, Armies Wood West. Hello again, Leicestershire people. All this week we're going to be in the only district in the county that so far TVI has yet to touch. This is Blaby, a collection of 24 parishes that sit between Leicester and Hinckley, most of which fell within the boundaries of the ancient Leicester Forest, a royal woodland that covered around 56 square miles. That means our starting point for the district actually makes a lot of sense. Welcome folks to the tiny hamlet of Leicester Forest West. It has a population of around 30 people, making it one of the smallest in Leicestershire and a lump less of a settlement than its much better known neighbour, Leicester Forest East. Although it's a parish, Leicester Forest West is barely even on the map. In fact, some maps don't even record it at all, but they should. The hamlet is made up of two roads, one being the A47 to Hinckley and the other being a minor lane that runs from Peckleton over the district boundary. Within it are three main landmarks, a pub called the Bull's Head, a boarding kennels and a motor racing garage. The rest of the properties here are residences or farm buildings, and the remainder of the land is either agricultural or forested. The clumps of trees you see here were once part of Leicester Forest, which was known in the Domesday Book as Hereswood. That literally meant Armies Wood, and it was owned at the time by Hugh de Grandmesnil before passing through the hands of successive Earls of Leicester. Well, today we are about to follow in their footsteps. Let's see what we can find among all of these ancient trees. This will not be the longest walk I've ever done. Leicester Forest West is a minuscule settlement that barely even registers on some modern maps. It has literally two roads. One of them is the A47, where you can find a pub, a boarding kennels and a garage, and the other is this, Peckleton Lane, which has most of the houses. With a population of around 30 people, this one would be so easy to overlook, but as the regulars know, I'm pretty handy at making a banquet out of a tin of beans. Several parts of the two roads are covered by some leafy green trees. At one time, the whole parish would have been covered in trees. Where within the area that was once covered by Leicester Forest, it was some 14 miles long and 4 miles wide, giving it a total land area of 56 square miles. It sat primarily between the River Soar and Rothley Brook and was described in the Domesday Book as Hereswood, or the Armies Wood. It was a royal woodland owned by Hugh de Grandmesnil before passing down the line of the successive Earls of Leicester. In the 13th century, townsfolk of Leicester had the right to acquire wood in part of the forest known as the Frith. Today, that area is now occupied by places such as Glenfield. Eventually, the wooded nature of the area declined, resulting in several areas being enclosed to preserve them and the establishment of hunting parks instead. It declined further in the 15th and 16th centuries due to overexploitation, unlicensed felling and sheep grazing. In 1628, it was officially disafforested and was sold off during the rest of the 17th century in parts. This caused riots among those affected by loss of rights to pasture and resources. Commoners did receive compensation if they could show a valid claim, but many were not able to if they'd settled of their own accord. Riots occurred in response, destroying existing enclosures in spring 1627 and again in 1628 following the final division of the lands. The Crown still made considerable compensation to the local manorial lords and tenants, as well as other residents. Now, very little of the ancient woodland remains, but there are still clumps here and there. After disafforestation, most of the area was cleared to provide land for farming and housing. The forest name, though, still lives on in the name of two settlements. They are, of course, the village of Leicester Forest East and the hamlet of Leicester Forest West, where we are today. So given that this was all trees at one time, it's perhaps not all that surprising that there aren't many landmarks here. Having said that, Leicester Forest East is massive. This, though, not so. It's actually quite surprising how many trees do remain here in Leicester Forest. I was looking on the map before I came here, and you can see clumps of trees, but certainly not as many as I've experienced walking down that lane there. There's quite a few left, actually. So I suppose the name Leicester Forest is still quite relevant here. Now, in terms of landmarks, this place doesn't have a lot, really. There's a pub, though, and we're heading towards that next. Leicester Forest West has three main landmarks, and they all sit on the A47 between Leicester and Hinckley. This here is the Bull's Head pub. Originally licensed during the 1770s, this was formerly named the Halfway House as a result of it being approximately midway between Leicester and Hinckley. It remains to this day a regular stop for people making that journey. However, it was renamed to the Bull's Head in the 1820s, possibly due to the fact it was frequented by cattle drovers. Since 1897, it's been owned and managed by Everards. The pub underwent a major refurbishment in 2014. The interior has exposed ceiling timbers, quarry tile and wood flooring, and log-burning stoves, which all add to the rural ambience out here. Out the back is a small decked veranda leading onto a large lawn and garden with picnic tables and children's play equipment. Buses for Leicester and Hinckley stop on the A47 right outside. The two other things of note here are just up the A47 towards Leicester at Mansfield Villa Farm. This here is the A47 Boarding Kennels and Cattery. This is a second-generation family-run business with over 40 years of experience. All of their pet kennels are located indoors across a 5-acre site. So Mansfield Villa Farm is like a little industrial estate as well. It's not just the cattery and the kennels. There's also a garage there, which is part of a racing team. Here's a bit more about them. Also within Mansfield Villa Farm is a motorsport garage owned and operated by Team Parker Racing. Its principals are Andy and Stuart Parker, who lend their name to the team. Team Parker were founded in 1997 and have competed in various motor racing series, including Formula Vauxhall Junior and British Formula 3. More recently, the team have also competed in the British Touring Car Championship, where they do have a race win to their name. And effectively, people, that's all there is to Leicester Forest West. We've got the kennels and the cattery behind me there and the base of Team Parker. And really, all we need to do from this point onwards is head back down to where we began. Just want to show you something first, though. There is actually a sign here that says Leicester Forest West. So even though this doesn't register on most modern maps, it still has its own identity. So all that really remains now is to walk back to the start. That, in effect, has been Leicester Forest West. Its eastern brother is larger by far and much more village-like. Well, I'll tell you something else the map doesn't show you: how steep the land is out here. Peckleton Lane is deceivingly quite a steep hill. So if you are going to walk the route I've just walked for whatever reason, just be aware you might need your Weetabix in the morning. With one down in Blaby, it's time to move on to number 2. Tomorrow we're off to a place that can be defined by a central village cluster, but it takes in far more in its environs. See you later, folks. Welcome back to Blaby again, everybody. Now, there's a sign behind me on a lamppost there that says, "Be aware of pedestrians," and I think it's something to do with the local school around here. But it's kind of important anyway, school or not, because this village has got some tight little narrow lanes. You'll see from the drive-in a moment just how tight they actually are. This is the beautiful little village of Thurlaston. Thurlaston-Thorleifers Farm. Alright, Blaby people, are you ready for round 2? In the first episode of this series, we didn't really get to see a proper village. Well, today we will. This is Thurlaston, and it's an absolute beauty. Located just over 6 miles away from Leicester, Thurlaston is what I describe as a typical West Leicestershire village. It has so much character and charm, and it's all tied together nicely with a close-knit community that look out for each other. The history of Thurlaston extends back as far as Saxon times. Originally recorded as Turchillstone in the Domesday Book, it was under the ownership of the Viscount of Leicester, Robert de Bussy, from Hugh de Grandmesnil. Later, Robert de Champagne controlled the land under the pretence of a knight's fee, allocated to him by the king. It's believed that Champagne built the present church. Until at least the mid-1830s, agriculture was the main employment here, with 53% of occupants being involved in it. Handcrafts and manufacturing made up the remainder. In the present day, agriculture has dropped off significantly, with just 4% of Thurlaston's residents now involved in it. Today, the prominent occupations are the repair and trade of motor vehicles and the manufacturing industry, which over a quarter of the entire working population is involved in. Thurlaston has steadily grown over time. It hasn't experienced a massive population spike at any point, although it is worth noting that its current population is the highest it's ever been. The village has a school, 2 pubs, a village hall, a playing field and an evangelical church, but there's a lot more around it all. Let's go. We start this walk around Thurlaston on Enderby Road, which is in the northern reaches of the main village cluster. It's important not to confuse this place with another Thurlaston in Warwickshire. Although that's not too far away, they are very different places. This pleasant little village, whose main neighbours are Earl Shilton and Huncote, has thankfully been overlooked by major property developers. Since the 1881 census, there have been large changes in occupation of its residents. Agriculture was king out here at one time, but now it's almost non-existent. The village is laid out in what is effectively a square that's missing one of its sides. Luckily, we can complete the 4th side by using the playing field. At the first corner, we have landmark number 1. This is an old forge which has been converted now into what I reckon is Thurlaston's most attractive dwelling. It's certainly a unique feature of this corner, isn't it? Well, I suppose when compared to Leicester Forest West yesterday, this is a bit different, isn't it? There's a lot more buildings to see, a lot more to talk about. The next building to talk about is this one right here. That is the former post office. Thurlaston has no shops, despite the fact its population is large enough to perhaps sustain at least one. It doesn't have a post office either, but it used to. Here we have the old post office, which still retains its old post box in its wall. It's a clue to a bygone time when rural post offices were literally everywhere. Thurlaston does still possess a school, and it's had one since 1833. This school was first established by the rector of Thurlaston, but it wasn't originally here. In 1853, the current building was erected at a cost of £1,000. It was designed to cater for 70 pupils of both sexes. 2 years later, the builders were in again. They would add an infant school to the site, and that allowed for up to 100 pupils, all of whom were receiving free education. Further additions have been made to the buildings over the years. Now the school is a voluntary aided C of E school supported by both the local authority and the Diocese of Leicester. Literally right next door to the school is an open patch of grass which is utilised by the school on sports days when it's turned into a running track. Okay, so I've just perched the camera on this little low wall in front of that green space, and behind me you can see there's a row of houses. If you follow this row, it takes you to that tight corner that you saw in the drive-in. We're about to go around that corner and head up towards the village hall. It's an interesting little building, this one. Now we're at Thurlaston Village Hall, and this is the venue for the village's annual general meeting. That's where committee members meet to discuss the ongoings of the village. Although recently refurbished, the hall is a traditional 1920s building. It currently holds a variety of events and weekly classes such as aerobics and ballroom dancing, as well as children's activities. Thurlaston has a close-knit community which are collectively involved in many things that are unique to the village. Since 1971, for example, these have included the annual Thurlaston Carnival. So, as we said at the start of this walk, Thurlaston is laid out in sort of a square shape. The only thing is that one of the sides is missing. That is to say, there's no street between Desford Road and Earl Shilton Road. That's where the playing field comes in. We can cross that to get between them. The playing field features a small playground and a football pitch, but Thurlaston's main sporting facilities are elsewhere. We'll catch those later. There are two public houses in Thurlaston. One of them stands across the road from the church, which we'll check out in a moment. Built in the 1670s, this one has had a few names in its time, including the Gundog and the Poacher's Brasserie. It most recently was known as Dom. It got that name thanks to its Polish owner. In Polish, Dom means Aga, as in the cooking stove that some of you may have in your homes. At the moment, it's being renovated, and it's changed its name again to the Grey Gosling. Okay, so after turning around at the Grey Gosling, we're now on a footpath which runs all the way up to the school. It bisects the school and that little green space that's right next to it. If you walk up the path though, you're also passing the main entrance to Thurlaston's church. The lit gate is right here, as you can see. So we're going to head on through there and check out the church next. So let's check out the Church of All Saints next, which is rather amazingly the only listed building in the entire village. Can you believe that? This was probably built in the 12th century by the Champagne family, although part of the North Aisle was set aside as a burial place for the Turvilles. That's known as the Turville Chantry. The Turvilles came to England with the Normans during the conquest in 1066 and were given several manors in Leicestershire. The monuments in the North Aisle consist of a low altar tomb to Hugh Turville, who died in 1340, and his wife. At his feet is a mutilated animal, which is believed to be a dog. The church consists of a nave, a chancel, a tower and that large north aisle. In the 18th century there were major changes to the structure of the building. They included lowering the nave walls and the fitting of a slate roof. There are still remains in the north nave wall of a former rood stair, which has long gone. In 1825, lightning struck the bell tower and a wall, damaging some of the bell frames. In 1876, the old ring of 3 bells were changed to a peal of 5. In the 1840s and the early 1850s, a man called Stephen Fry, no, not the one you're all thinking of, renovated the chancel and the north aisle. In 1861, the chancel arch was rebuilt again. Religiously, Thurlaston has never been a village that's had an array of nonconformists. In fact, the only nonconformists it's ever had were Baptists, who arrived in the late 18th century. They would establish a meeting place in 1788 in what was described as simply a building. Well, there's nothing like being specific. In 1842, they would leave behind whatever building that was and move to this, Thurlaston's Evangelical Free Church on Main Street. This was built at a cost of £250. At the time of the 1851 religious census, it contained room for 300 sittings, 250 of which were free. There has never been a Sunday school here though. So the Grey Gosling might not be called Poacher's Brasserie anymore, but there is still a bit of evidence as to its former name. Outside the chapel here, there's a pole, and on it, you can see, there's a sign that says Poacher's Brasserie. That's not been removed yet, obviously. Now, while we're on the subject of pubs, here's the main one, the Elephant and Castle. Finally, within the village, we come to the other pub. This is the Elephant and Castle, the name of which is believed to be linked to the pub of the same name in London. The name is likely a nod to the Worshipful Company of Cutlers' coat of arms, which features an elephant carrying a castle. That is thought to have inspired the name of a coaching inn. However, some historians argue that Elephant and Castle has always been a common pub name. Perhaps we'll never know, but I do know a bit about this one. This is a traditional Everett's Village pub, offering a warm and friendly welcome to anyone and everyone who walked through its doors. It supported quite a few local events and traditions, such as a pram race that's usually held on Boxing Day. Trust me, that's the stuff of legend around here. That brings the main walk to a close, and all that remains on foot is to head back to Enderby Road. However, that's by no means the end of this episode. If you drive down the Earl Shilton Road away from Thurlaston, it's not long before you arrive at the main sports ground on the left-hand side. The ground is the home of both Thurlaston FC and their respective junior teams, which compete in the local Leicestershire leagues. Not too far away from the ground, there's another sport that this area is known for, although we can't get to its ground. Thurlaston has an archery club within the grounds of a big hall. Remember back at the church we mentioned the name Turville? Well, west of the main Thurlaston village there's a huge parkland which belongs to the township of Normanton Turville. At the centre of the parkland was Normanton Turville Hall, and the history of this place is somewhat obscure. It was anciently the seat of the Turville family, hence the name. For them though, it became at some point of secondary importance, and so not a lot is really known of the house that stood here in their time. It was to be rebuilt by John Rue after he acquired the estate in the early 17th century, although some commentators think it could have been a little earlier. The house was apparently largely unaltered in the later 17th and 18th centuries, although Edward Rue Yeo, who dissipated a large inheritance, is said to have made some improvements. He focused his efforts on the stable block and landscaping the park. The results of that were recorded on early editions of OS maps. Nothing is known of any alterations to the house by the next resident, Hollard Smith, or by the family for which it was an occasional residence until 1850. That family were the Arkwrights, the very same branch of which included the industrialist Richard Arkwright, famous for building quite a few mills across the land. Normanton Turville was the first big landed estate purchase made by Richard Arkwright, in fact. He bought the estate in 1796 for £33,000. His eldest son, Richard Arkwright Jr., lived at the hall in 1810. In 1824, Richard Sr. also bought the 5,500-acre Sutton Scarsdale estate in Derbyshire for the enormous sum of £216,000. Despite the fact that Sutton Scarsdale was a much grander house, he remained at Normanton as well, and continued to live here until his death in 1832. The house was given a new porch and a central gable, as well as a rather crude semi-timbered cladding in the 1870s. This was likely done by Colonel Richard Worsley Worswick after he inherited the estate. He was also responsible for the addition of a Roman Catholic chapel at the rear of the house, which survived after the house itself was pulled down. In 1912, Normanton Hall was the seat of Major William Worsley Worswick, a Justice of the Peace. He would lose his son, Basil, in World War I during the Irish Easter Rebellion. The house was unoccupied during that war, and the estate was put up for sale in 1921. It was finally demolished in 1928, apparently after a fire had damaged the building. And so today, all that remains is the parkland and a few ancillary buildings. The archery club is within the parkland, along with an airgun club and a fishery to the south of the estate. Now, to get back to the village, my original plan was to use a road called Watery Gate Lane, and the reason behind that name is about to become very apparent. On Watery Gate Lane, there's the most picturesque little ford, which crosses the road. Don't be fooled by its prettiness though, because this can be a bit of a nightmare in the winter. In December of 2020, a set of gates were installed next to the ford to stop traffic from using the road when the stream becomes flooded. It might not look like it floods right now, but it's the summertime. When the rains come, this is virtually impassable. In fact, it was recently named as the second worst place in the UK for motorists to get stuck in floodwater. The gates cost some £65,000, and they seem to have been worth that price tag. Between 2014 and 2018, fire and rescue services were called out 10 times to assist stricken vehicles right here. In the summer though, this is an absolute delight. Generations of Thurlaston children have used this ford as a makeshift paddling pool, a place to cool off in the long hot summers of yesteryear. So my plan was to drive through this ford, but it's a bit too deep, so I'm not going to attempt it. I know a man who is though. You might recognise this guy.
Hello everybody.
That is Ben Gredges, who you may remember from the Rufford episode I mentioned.
Yep, you might recognise me from the Rufford Ford days. I'm down at a different ford though today, Watery Gate Lane, as I'm sure Andy's probably explaining to you. But it is quite deep today. I thought you were going to go through for a minute there, but I saw you stop and I thought, oh no.
But you're about to.
Yeah, I can go through for you. I can give you a demonstration of how it's done. Yep.
Absolutely, please do.
No
please
worries.
do. Well, I never expected that. A little bit of an unexpected collaboration. He's coming back through again. Yeah, way too deep for me to attempt in my car, but he's got obviously a 4x4, so it's much easier for him. Apparently he's here today to catch some victims of the Ford. I'm not going to be one of them. After turning around and making my way back to the village, next we have the Thurlaston Garden Centre and Tea Room. It's a family-run business which offers a wide variety of plants, gardening supplies and a shop with gifts and clothing. As the name suggests, it also features a tea room called the Gardener's Rest, as well as a children's play area too. After a short trip through the village, next we're heading towards the next one. On the right, after the road has bent eastwards, you'll see an industrial building. That's Thurlaston Sawmill. I couldn't find a lot about it, but I imagine they cut a lot of wood here. Just beyond this is our final landmark. It's another sports ground, but it doesn't belong to Thurlaston, even though the site of it is still firmly within the parish boundaries. As we'll learn tomorrow, sport in the village of Huncote is a rather important thing. Huncote has several facilities including a leisure centre, but their main sports teams play here. This is the Huncote Sports and Social Club, which is where the village's football team, Burbage and Huncote FC, play their home games. They're members of the Leicester and District League and were formerly members of the Leicestershire Senior League. The club have a Football Foundation standard clubhouse and share their facilities with Huncote Cricket Club. The clubhouse was built in 2004 to replace a much older pavilion. It can boast 4 changing rooms, a bar and a function room to cater for up to 100 guests. The cricket club run 2 teams in the Leicestershire and Rutland Cricket League and also field a Sunday friendly 11 in order to develop the younger players at the club. And that will do us for Thurlaston. I'm starting to enjoy my trips to Leicestershire more and more, and it's villages like this one that keep me coming back. We still have 3 more Blaby villages to see this week. Tomorrow we're off to one that's rather awkwardly laid out, but has ample to talk about. See you down the road. Welcome back to Blaby again, everybody. Now below me there, you can see a motorway. That is the M69, and this parish spans the area that's both sides of that major road. The M69 runs from Leicester to Coventry, and if you drive along it, you'll be passing the parish of Huncote. Huncote, Hun's Cottage. Today in Blaby we're in the parish of Huncote, which centres around a small village to the west of the much bigger Narborough. It stands on the Thurlaston Brook and features a watermill at its southernmost point. Huncote is primarily a residential village. A lot of its northern and eastern areas are defined by lots of modern 20th century housing. The central core is located in the south of the village. That's the oldest part, where Huncote benefits from several of its amenities, some of which wouldn't be out of place in a small town. These include a pub called the Red Lion, a post office, 2 general stores, 3 hairdressers, a takeaway and 3 local parks. Huncote also has a woodyard and a residential care home for the elderly. There's also a leisure centre, which is considered to be one of the best in the county. It has a running track and a BMX club where the Huncote Hornets are based. North of the village is a pet rescue centre called Leicester Animal Aid. So in short, this one's got quite a lot for such a small place. Huncote is also known for being the village in which the actor Richard Armitage grew up. He's best known for his role as John Thornton in the TV programme North and South, and for his role as the Dwarf King and leader Thorin Oakenshield in Peter Jackson's film adaptation of The Hobbit. The latter brought him international recognition. And here's one for all the American viewers. If you possess the surname Honeycutt, or know someone who does, your ancestors come from this very village. Huncote is the etymological root of that surname. So, what are we waiting for? Let's go. The first port of call here in Huncote is an animal rescue centre located in the north of the parish, close to the M69. This is Leicester Animal Aid. It's a registered charity whose origins date back almost 70 years. The organisation was founded by one remarkable woman called Dorothy Farndon. In the 1950s, when it was the norm for most married women to stay at home, Dorothy bought stray dogs from the local police station to prevent them from being destroyed. Some of the rescued dogs were kept in her own home in Saffron Lane in South Wigston. Others found homes with members of her family and friends. Word soon spread that Dorothy could be relied upon to look after unwanted cats and dogs, and by 1959, some 300 dogs had been rescued by her. Her back garden had chalets to house stray cats until they too could be rehomed. In 1962, Dorothy had a total of 47 feline friends living at her property. Dorothy was affectionately known as the Florence Nightingale of pets, and soon built a team of loyal and hard-working volunteers. Since then, a lot has changed. Leicester Animal Aid now has 4.5 acres to call its own, and at any one time it can have up to 70 animals on site. Its first premises were at Thurlaston Lane, but they moved operations to Huncote in 1970. This site cost £7,500 plus a further £2,500 for alterations. In 2022 they added a new cat sanctuary named the Perfect Palace, thanks to a grant from the Pets at Home Foundation and a donation from a local family. Let's head into Huncote now and see what the village has for us. From LAA's premises we have to pass over the M69 and then past a biofuel site before the village comes into view. Okay then, here we are in Huncote Village, and this one is a tale of two distinct areas. You've got the old section, which is to the south of the village, and then this northern section where I'm standing right now is a sea of new build properties which have come along in the last 40 or 50 years, I would hazard a guess. We're going to start off by walking through this lot along Spence Lane. Let's go. We start our walk on Spence Lane in the northernmost part of Huncote. It's not all that long ago that this area was just a patch of green fields. OS maps from the year 1900 show a small cluster of properties to the south of the village, whilst everything else was pretty much just countryside. Whilst Huncote still possesses a lot of countryside today, the continued expansion of the village in areas like this have made it quite the substantial little place, with an ever-shrinking green fringe. Small parks have been placed here and there to maintain a modicum of balance. This one here with a pond and a playground is a good example. Huncote is by no means a village that's experienced massive growth in response to housing demand, but there are areas that have sprung up in recent times. This is one of them. The main population growth in the village came between the 1950s and the 1970s, bulking out the village to the north and east. Our first real landmark is Huncote Community Primary School. This was built in the 1960s and has served the village ever since. The history of education in this village goes back a little further though. In 1852 there were two schools in Huncote, but they were both held in the same building. One was a Sunday school and the other was a national school. The building in question still stands today. It's on Brook Street in the older part of the village to the south. Attendance at Huncote was frequently poor. Many of the boys in particular seemed to put work before lessons as they grew older and nearer to leaving school. A lot unofficially left in their teens. The old school is now a private house, quite literally a world away from what this place is today. Now, I wonder how many of the children who are currently attending Huncote Community Primary School have aspirations of an acting career. Well, one man from Huncote did so a few years ago. This next area is more of the same, a vast clump of 20th century housing. We're on Denman Road here, which will take us to the Village Green and Narborough Road. There's not a lot to talk about in this area, so to fill the time, let's talk a bit about Huncote's most famous former resident. His name is Richard Armitage. An actor and an author, Armitage received recognition in the UK with his first leading role as John Thornton in the TV programme North and South, which aired in 2004. However, it was his role as Dwarf King and leader Thorin Oakenshield in Peter Jackson's film trilogy adaptation of The Hobbit that made him an international household name. His other notable roles include John Proctor in Yale Farber's stage production of The Crucible, Francis Dolarhyde in the American TV series Hannibal, and Guy of Gisborne in Robin Hood. He also voiced Trevor Belmont in the Netflix adaptation of Castlevania, and in 2020 he played the lead role in the Netflix miniseries The Stranger. Busy boy, right? The funny thing is, acting was not something in his blood. He was the son of a secretary and an engineer. Although he was born in Leicester, he grew up here in Huncote. He attended Huncote School before being educated further at Brockington College in Enderby. It was there he followed an interest in music. He would then transfer at the age of 14 to Pattison College in Coventry, which is an independent school specialising in the performing arts. That was so he could focus on drama and dance. One of Richard Armitage's trademarks is his baritone voice, which he's employed as a voice actor since 2006. Whilst working on Robin Hood, he was asked to record audiobooks for the first season of that series. He's also had a lot of success as a TV and advert narrator. In 2022, he ventured into video games for the first time, providing the voice of the Daemon Prince Balaka in Total War Warhammer 3. I have to wonder, would he ever consider voicing a few YouTube videos made by a mad guy trying to visit every civil parish in England? Hey, come on, a man can dream. So here's the green. It's not much to write home about, but it does help to break up the housing for a moment. The next area is, again, yet more housing. So the village sign you can see there was erected in the year 2000 to celebrate the millennium. Huncote's got a special symbol. If you have a look above the word Huncote there, you can see there's like an oval shaped thing, and that has a pig on it, because pigs are associated with this place. We'll discover why later. This is Ratcliffe Drive, which we're going to follow towards St James's Close. Once there, we'll have a look at the church. Here's a bit of general history about Huncote whilst we traverse this section. The origins of the village are a bit obscure. There is some historical evidence to suggest that it began life as a daughter settlement of a larger Saxon village. The chances are that village was its neighbour, Stony Stanton. Not much is known about it during medieval times, but in the 18th century things really started to take off industrially. Huncote was a domestic framework knitters village. It didn't last long though. It was soon replaced in Victorian times by quarrying, which helped to improve local transport systems by providing better roadways. As you can imagine, the roads in the village were in tip-top shape. The population back then was just over 500, and the village could be defined by an area bounded by Main Street, Churchback Lane and Thurlaston Brook. Modern-day Huncote has a population of around 2,300. With growth came the need for more facilities, and it wasn't long before a church was erected. The thing is, it was never finished. This is St James's Church. It was dedicated in 1898, but it was never fully completed. Let's tell the story of how this church ended up only partially built. Ecclesiastically, Huncote used to be in the same parish as its bigger neighbour, Narborough, and for many years it had no church of its own. Instead, it relied on Narborough for theirs. That said, there was an ancient chapel dedicated to St James that used to serve the small populace here. It had fallen into disuse by 1622 and was reported to be in ruins. The present church is approximately 50 metres to the northwest of where the ruined chapel was. It's now been built over by the housing we've just seen. St James's Church was built as a replacement, even though it would take almost 300 years to begin. The time lapse was for the same reason it was never finished: a lack of funds. This peculiar building has no tower, it consists only of a nave and a chancel and a vestry on the northern side. It still has a pleasant interior with plenty of light from the many windows. There are no pews here, instead there are wooden chairs, and the inside is well cared for with some nice features. Huncote's church is well worth a visit, even if it is just to see its interesting unfinished state and the lost tower that was never completed. So opposite the unfinished church, we've got what seems to be like a little memorial garden. There's a silhouette of a soldier just there with some poppies at his feet and one on his cap as well. And as well as him, we've also got this. Some poppies underneath this, what appears to be a Spitfire. Using Duncan Avenue now, we're heading north again, and this will take us towards and past a new build street called Quarry View Close. The name of the street could be a reference to more than one quarry actually. On the 1900 OS map, there are 3 quarries located in the general vicinity of Huncote. 2 of them were Huncote Quarry and Croft Quarry, which would merge together in the 1970s. We'll see the result of that merge tomorrow. The other one was a small-scale affair located to the east of the village off the Narborough Road. Today, that one's occupied by a landfill site, so the chances are Quarry View refers to Croft. Now we're on the playing field, and here in Huncote, this is another King George field. It's managed by a charity set up by Huncote Parish Council. It's been here since January 1938. This is, without a doubt, the best green space the village has. It's huge and features a playground and loads of interconnecting footpaths to other areas of the village. Now for a walk down Forest Road. It's a gentle downhill amble which will take us to the centre of the village and to the main shops and amenities. Again, it's mostly residential, but the further downhill you go here, the more the housing type begins to change. At first, it's pretty modern, with a collection of 20th century detached and semi-detached properties, but soon the residences become red brick terraces, clearly Victorian or Edwardian in origin. That's because Huncote is a great example of a village that started within a small cluster and expanded outwards, and Forest Road was the first street to gain newer houses. And of course the name Forest Road is a reference to Leicester Forest, which we learned about on Monday. Now towards the end of Forest Road, we're starting to come to the business end of Huncote. This is where all the main sort of stuff is located, all in a tiny concentrated area. Let's go check it all out. Almost at the end we come to a large chapel. This is linked to the Primitive Methodists, who have been around in Huncote since at least 1874. In that year they built their first chapel on Cheney End. 33 years later, they built a new one, and that's the one on your screens right now. It cost £1,050 to construct and was designed to seat 220 people. It's still in use today. The original chapel was to become the registered office of Velos Spares, used to store parts for classic motorcycles. After the chapel, the road splits into 2 parts. If you take the left-hand fork, you'll come to one of the village's shops. Today it's called Huncote News, but it used to be called Video Box at one time. The main row of shops is in the other direction. Let's head that way next as the road starts to fall gently downhill into the valley of the Thurlaston Brook. This building is Alexandra House. It's a family-run, top-quality residential care home for the elderly, and that's about all I found out about it. So So the centre of Huncote is kind of like a crossroads. You've got Forest Road up there, and in the other direction you've got Brook Street, and that is where the school is, the old school, which we mentioned earlier. Now also on this corner, I'm just going to move out of the way of this car, this house here, which is kind of between the two bits of Forest Road, that used to be the old post office, and that has now moved into the other shop, which we'll see in a moment. Next to Alexandra House is a small walled area which features a flagpole. We know what this is, don't we? It's a pinfold. There's no need to explain what it was for because we see loads of them everywhere, but I can tell you the story behind how this one came to look as you see it now. Although it's been well over a century since this held any animals, the site of the pinfold at Huncote has always been a favourite spot on Main Street. In 1973, a garden was opened here and a plaque was set onto an old granite mounting block which had stood for years near the Red Lion Inn. It stood here for more than 30 years until Huncote Parish Council refurbished the garden in 2008. New stone was provided by Croft Quarry. Local craftsmen built it as a dry stone wall. A ceremony was then held to mark the reopening of the pinfold when it was finished. Children from the primary school cut the ribbon to reopen it. Now, this little spot can be used by any member of the village as a place of rest and relaxation. It's a meeting place, or somewhere to chat if you will. Within the site is something called a tethering ring, kindly donated by a Mr. Davy who found it in his garden elsewhere in Huncote. Tethering rings were used to tie up animals in a pinfold. Also within this is a statue. It's called the Pig on the Wall, and it was added to the pinfold in June 2020. It recognises the village's connection with pigs, but also the village motif. There are two possible origins of the Pig on the Wall. One says that a pig in a local farm used to follow all funeral processions to the cemetery, whilst the other says it's a spin on a traditional tale. Okay, so now we have the main area of shops. It's a neat little row which consists of a hairdresser's, a takeaway, a fish and chip shop and a spa store. On the other side of the road is Main Street Garage. Okay, let's talk pubs next. Huncote only has one these days, and it's the building right behind me. There used to be two though. Huncote can only boast one pub these days. There used to be two, but the Barley Sheaf was demolished in the 1930s, leaving the place with just the Red Lion. As far as pub histories go here, we can go right back to 1752. In those days, there were two public houses, but their names are not known. Even so, experts reckon one was called the Birch Tree. Whatever it was called, it would change its name to the Red Lion, and that's the one that stands here right now. The other was listed from 1752 to 1781, although it may have existed well before that. There's no mention of it after 1781, and from then on there was just the one public house. The Barley Sheaf never originated as a fully fledged pub. It was instead a beer house, and later it turned into a pub, once again giving Huncote a second. Right, now the next thing to do is head up Cheney End. It's a narrow lane that's a dead end, but it becomes a footpath. There are two things we need to talk about up there, and they both pertain to chapels. One of them we can see, but the other is buried under some new houses. In February 1990, Hassel Homes were in the village, beginning a housing development off Cheney End. All was going to plan until they discovered some human bones. When the bones were analysed, they were thought to date back to the 12th century. The company then delayed building work to enable archaeologists to excavate the site. They discovered a large medieval building with granite foundations, pieces of glass and wall plaster, and there were yet more fragments of bone. It should be noted that the chapel was not the one that St James's Church replaced. Now built over, it provided the name of the street that sits on it, Chantry Close. Okay, at the end of Cheney End, it's a dead end. But before we reach said dead end, there's another building to check out. You remember earlier we saw the Methodist Chapel? Well, this here is the building that preceded it. There it is. Let's see what this is all about, shall we? So this is Huncote's original primitive Methodist Chapel, which was built in 1874. This is the one that was replaced by the other building we saw earlier. It's an about turn here as we make for a footpath that will lead us past the allotments. That'll keep the fans happy. If you're new around here, finding the allotments is a running joke. Now our route starts to make for a sports-themed area. Huncote, as we know from yesterday's episode, has plenty of sporting facilities, although a lot of them are over the Thurlaston border. Huncote also has a running club called Huncote Harriers and a BMX club called the Huncote Hornets. The latter's home track opened in 2015 and it's considered to be one of the top tracks in the country. So this is Huncote Leisure Centre, which also adds to the sporting facilities, although currently it only opens in the evenings. This was built in the 1980s on land that previously served as a landfill site. After being sealed and capped in 1973, it faced challenges in managing methane gas extraction. The issues with methane led to temporary closures of the leisure centre after it was built, and even as late as 2021, there were still issues. I guess that's the problem with building on a landfill. In 2021, the centre was closed for quite a while due to elevated gas levels, but has since reopened after new safety measures were implemented. The centre itself has a variety of facilities, including sports halls, squash courts and a gym, and it's all been upgraded since it was first built. It's a great asset to the modern Huncote village. Our final stop is the cemetery, which opened in 1897. Prior to its opening, many Huncote residents were buried in Narborough's parish churchyard. That's because, as we know, St James's Church was never completed and thus never had an actual churchyard. The cemetery is now managed by Huncote Parish Council. And I've decided to take a little perch on this bench, which you can find at the edge of the cemetery here. Just take the weight off my feet for 5 minutes. That's it. That's our walk around Huncote village. There's one more thing to talk about though. You may have noticed when we were walking down towards the Red Lion that there's a very steep hill there. That's running down into the valley of the Thurlaston Brook, which is the watercourse that Huncote sits on. And on that brook, there was a mill. So let's drive away from Huncote now, and as we do, we'll pass over Huncote Bridge. That spans the watercourse which the village was founded upon, Thurlaston Brook. The brook was a key landmark for Huncote. Before framework knitting and quarrying took over, there was milling, and there's been a watermill here since at least the time of Doomsday. There's no record of the names of any Huncote millers until 1833. The first one to appear is Charles Payne, and 1833 was the year he died. He owned the old watermill that stood on Thurlaston Brook. Following him, it was owned and run by John Hobill. John's son worked with him until 1875, but from 1876 he took over the running of the mill himself until shortly after 1900, when it ceased working. The mill itself has now been demolished, but the mill house and some of the outbuildings remain as private residences off the road to Croft. That's that for Huncote. The next parish we're off to is Huncote's southern neighbour, and the boundary between the two features a quite magnificent hill. Tomorrow we'll start our journey around that village by climbing that hill and having a look at the view you can see from the top. Spoiler alert, it's quite incredible. Welcome back to Blaby again, everybody. Now, Leicestershire is not a county that you usually associate with anything mountainous, but here in this parish I'm about to climb a big hill that looks like a mountain, let me tell you. This hill right here stands on the edge of a quarry, and it was threatened by said quarry until a few years ago. Let's go up the hill and check that quarry out. This is Croft. Croft machine. Yeah, I've no idea how this one means machine either. That's apparently, though, its derivation, if you believe the University of Nottingham's key to English place names. Anyway, this is Croft, everyone, and it's famous for a rather big hole. Croft lies about 8 miles southwest of Leicester, and its nearby places include Stony Stanton, Broughton Astley, Huncote and Narborough. It can be defined as an industrial village thanks to the presence of a quarry which dominates the landscape between it and Huncote. Quarrying has been a thing in Croft since the Romans were here. They were the first to excavate the area for natural minerals, doing so in a small pit they called the Clevis. It was a granite quarry used in the construction of ancient bridges that crossed the Foss Way. Since then, large-scale extraction has taken place across this area. As we know from yesterday, Huncote had several quarries. One of them was to merge with an ever-expanding quarry at Croft in the 1970s, and it's that one which everyone knows today. Next to the quarry is the natural Croft Hill, which stands 128 metres above the floodplain of the River Soar, which splits Croft into its two parts, the older northern section and the newer southern section. Croft Hill, although an isolated landmark, marks almost the physical centre of England and has been used as a meeting place for centuries. It provides an excellent view of the Soar Valley and of Croft Quarry. We've got a very varied village to explore here. Croft may be dominated by the quarry, but it's seen lots of changes since that was first dug. Come with me and let's put this village on the map. Before we can get to the village of Croft, we have to tackle its two most famous landmarks. Both of them are located in the parish's far north. Millions of years ago, there was an underground volcanic eruption in Croft and a ball of igneous rock formed under the Earth's surface. Eventually, the surface eroded, leaving half of that ball exposed to the elements. Today, we know it as Croft Hill, and here we are, climbing up its steep side. The hill is by far the most significant feature in Croft, towering over the village at 300 feet above sea level. The hill itself is 128 feet above the valley of the River Soar below. The hill is natural, being composed mainly of granite with marl surrounding it. Before the war, it was used as a golf course, with 9 holes surrounding its peak. In ancient times, the hill's distinctive shape, rising straight up from the Soar Valley, made it a focal point for gatherings of importance. In 836 AD, it's known that the king of Mercia held council on this hill. Before that, it was used by the Romans, probably as a signal station. Earlier still, evidence has been found of Bronze and Iron Age activity up here, thanks to the discovery of several implements. The hill was also the setting for executions. Because this was the site of a gallows, it's reputed to be haunted by several souls. In 1124, some 44 hangings took place at once here. It was an event that was recorded by Lord Bassett of Sapcote. Now, Croft is usually a name that means a small farm or some sort of land holding. In this case, though, Croft derives from an ancient word meaning craft or machine. Although there's no way of knowing for sure what that craft or machine was, the likelihood is it might have been something to do with quarrying. After all, you can't miss Croft Quarry. It dominates the landscape as you look down from Croft Hill. So it's not a long climb up here, but it's very, very steep. So yeah, if you're going to do this yourself, just be prepared. In the distance there, you can see Huncote, where we were yesterday. And in this direction, you have the biggest landmark that Croft possesses. Literally, that is Croft Quarry. Croft Quarry produces high-quality granite products for the construction industry. The hill almost became part of this massive hole a few years ago, as it too is almost solid granite, but it was saved from blasting by a public campaign organised by the locals. Although the quarry was a workplace for a lot of Croft's residents, the feeling was that the villagers still wanted the hill as well, so it remains to this day. As we see it today, Croft Quarry is one massive hole in the Earth's surface. In fact, this is the largest man-made hole in Europe, believe it or not. However, Croft never used to be this large, and what you might not realise is that it's actually two quarries that have merged together to form one. This takes us back to the Huncote episode yesterday and John Hobill, the owner of its watermill. In the 1863 trade directories of Leicestershire, he was credited with working a granite quarry too. The land was owned by Isaac Abel and leased by Hobill, who brought in a man named William Smith from Gruby to run the quarrying operations. Huncote's quarry stone was mainly used for making curbstones and for the paving and repairing of roads. At some point it was sold to George Marston. During the late 19th century and the early part of the 20th century, the quarry at Huncote thrived, employing up to 100 men, but this changed significantly by the end of World War II. Many workers left to fight in the war, and when it was all over, Huncote never regained its workforce. Adding to its demise was the change in how roads were to be constructed. An increasing use of concrete replacing cut stone curbstones and paving stones meant that by the mid-1950s, the quarry simply wasn't profitable enough. It was also too small to accommodate most modern machinery, and eventually it closed. Croft, though, which was nearby, had none of those issues. It was in 1872 that the Croft Stone and Brick Company was founded by two brothers named Samuel and Henry Pochin, after Samuel acquired an already pre-existing brickworks. Henry was also an industrial chemist and inventor, and became very wealthy, buying the Bodnant estate in the Conwy Valley in North Wales. It would go on to be owned by the English China Clay Company in the 1970s, at which point it would expand its workings northwards into the remains of Huncote. That would form the vast super quarry you see here today. The whole thing is now operated by Aggregate Industries UK, and it's a long way removed now from the days of John Hobill. His quarry, though, in a roundabout way, still continues to provide work in the area more than 150 years later. Croft Quarry extracts around 2 million tonnes of granite every year. The site is half a mile wide, and when quarrying finishes here, the bottom will be 150 metres below sea level. As you can imagine, water is a big problem with a hole this big. Consequently, Croft Quarry has to pump out a staggering 250,000 gallons of water every day. Well, don't get me wrong, people, this is a brilliant view up here, but you have to be careful when you come up Croft Hill, because if you come up, you've got to go back down, which is what I have to do now. Pick and choose your route carefully to descend this hill. It is so steep. You could so easily fall over and injure yourself. I'm going to psych myself up to do that. I'm going to spend another 5 minutes up here just admiring the quarry, if you can do that, I suppose. And there it is. The biggest man-made hole in Europe. It's magnificent, isn't it? Well, I made it down in one piece. I had an innovative way of doing it. I slid down on my backside. We begin our walk in the older part of Croft Village, which sits to the north of both the River Soar and a railway known as the South Leicestershire Branch Line. Our first port of call is an old school. Despite its size, this was a primary school. It was built in 1854 and gave education to the children of Croft until they reached the age of 11. This school was built from Croft's very own granite, extracted from the earth at the quarry we've just seen. Croft still has a school in the much newer southern part of the village. When it was built, it left this one redundant, and so today it's a private residence. Heading westwards, we come to a small green where we'll encounter both the village church and the only pub to Croft's name. The pub is called the Heathcote Arms. It started life as a row of converted cottages that became licensed premises in the early 1800s. The name Heathcote is significant. The original owner of the row was Mrs. Moyer, whose maiden name was Heathcote. The row originally had a brewhouse connected to it where the ale was made. This was eventually turned into a slaughterhouse, and there's no ale brewed on site today. However, the pub is still going strong and uses the historic Heathcote name. The old part of Croft was all built around a church dedicated to St Michael and All Angels. It dates back to 1209 and is set into the slope of Croft Hill behind it. This building, although ancient, isn't fully original. Part of it was rebuilt by the Reverend James Brooks using stone from the quarry in the 19th century. It consists of a nave, 2 transepts, a chancel, a west tower and a south porch. The inside is a delight, with a wooden beamed roof and a Gothic-inspired altar made from carved marble. The east end wall and arches consist of 2-coloured stone, whilst the rest is plastered and whitewashed. The church is well cared for and it's spacious and open. It may have been heavily restored by the Victorians, but they did a fine job here in Croft. The cemetery around the church is quite large and well maintained. Next door are the offices for the quarry, which are set in some very nice grounds. A visit to this church has the added benefit that you can combine it with a good walk up Croft Hill and then come back down for a pint in the Heathcote Arms. It's all rather handy. I tell you what, you can tell this church is set into the side of Croft Hill, because even walking up the path towards the main building here, this is a slope and it's not exactly shallow. Right, let's head back out of the churchyard again, and our next job is to discuss what you can see on the other side of the road over there. That has a connection to the Romans. The church looks out onto Croft Pastures, an ancient reserve known as the Clevis, which was once a small pit. This was the site where the Romans quarried the first stone in Croft. They used stone from Croft to build bridges and roads, most of them along the Foss Way, which isn't far from here. Even though Croft has been used as a quarry for the past 2,000 years, serious quarrying only started in around the mid-19th century. In front of that, on the corner of the modern road, is Croft's War Memorial, commemorating those killed or missing in World War I, a total of 7 men. World War II's names were added later. Perhaps unsurprisingly, given the proximity of the quarry, this one is a granite column. It was erected in 1921 by the Croft Ex-Servicemen's Association. It was commissioned by a Mr. Spence of the Croft Granite Company, and a mason called Jack Knight cut the stone. So now let's head away from the older part of the village and into the much newer section south of the River Soar. To do that, we have to cross a bridge. The bridge over the Soar was a very large step in Croft's evolution, allowing for the first time a connection between the 2 sections of the village. The initial bridge was built in 1857, but at that time it was just a basic road that allowed horses to cross. There were no cars in those days, so it was all that was really required. Later, people needed to walk across while staying out of the way of cars, and so that led to paths on either side being added using 2 metal girders attached to the bottom of the bridge. If this bridge had never been constructed, it's doubtful the southern part of Croft would have developed into what it is today. Croft's expansion southwards is usually cited as being one of the main reasons for the construction of the bridge in the first place. Okay, so even though Croft is generally speaking these days unknown to people outside of Leicestershire, there was a time that it was visited by quite a lot of people. And the reason is all to do with Croft Hill. Well, one of the reasons. The other reason is to do with a field, which we'll talk about in a bit. And when people visited Croft, they came here by rail, because it used to have a station. After a few more steps, you'll come to a second bridge, and this one crosses a railway line. Down there is the South Leicestershire branch line, built to connect Birmingham to Peterborough. Croft used to have a station on this line. Opened in 1877, it stood close to this bridge and once brought day trippers in the summer who would picnic on Croft Hill. However, in the winter, it was also a popular stop for some people. We'll learn why a little later around this route. The station closed in 1968 thanks to the infinite wisdom of Dr. Beeching. I guess he never experienced Croft Hill for himself. Croft was a simple timber station constructed modularly. It was similar to the type often seen on the LNWR's Rugby to Stamford line, with timber braces supporting an awning. In 1885 it was extended to the west to provide a goods office built using concrete. A station master's house was provided in 1892 on the western side of Station Road. The platforms were faced in local granite, mined from, where else, Croft Quarry. These were extended in 1904 and again in 1922. The only things that remain now are the station master's house and some associated cottages. The original station burned down after the suffragettes set fire to it in 1914. Although Croft has no station now, the village still relies on the line. It provides the quarry with a vital transport link, allowing it to quickly export its products all over the Midlands. Since the 1940s, Croft has become quite a substantial village. The southern section used to be fields mainly, barring one small section which we'll come to later. The centre of the village gradually shifted away from the area around the church, relocating itself to a newer nucleus south of the river and the railway line. Housing has been built on a grand scale here. The first development to take place was the building of Salisbury Avenue in the 1960s. That's this street right here. Yeah, Salisbury might have been the first, but it wasn't the last, as we're about to see. Okay, our next job is to basically turn back on ourselves here. We're going to take a left turn onto the main road that runs through Croft from north to south. Now this used to be the road that lorries used to use to get to the quarry and from the quarry. It's not the case anymore, as we're about to find out. By using Salisbury Avenue and a small connecting footpath, we've turned around and we're heading back north again. This is Broughton Road. Before a brand new access road was built for the lorries to reach the quarry, this was the main road for them, and it wasn't pleasant in those days. As you can imagine, the quarry creates a lot of pollution, what with dust, noise and the fumes from the 1,000 plus lorries coming and going to it every day. The solution was to build a £5 million access road leading into the quarry, completely bypassing Broughton Road and leaving the villagers to enjoy a more peaceful life. The houses here have no particular style because they were all built at different times. It isn't an estate as such. Buyers bought a plot of land and then simply built their house on it. It's the same story with our next street, Arbour Road, although along here things have altered a little over the last century. Where Arbour Road meets Winston Avenue, there's a small cul-de-sac called Shades Close. That's a reference to what used to stand right here. When the railway station was still in operation, one of the best reasons to come to Croft in the winter was to go ice skating. There was a field in this part of the village which belonged to a man called Johnny Swain. During the winter, the field would flood and then freeze when the temperature dropped low enough. Visitors would therefore come to skate on it. Johnny Swain profited considerably from this. He owned some tea rooms next to the field, serving refreshments for the skaters. They stood here where Shades Close is today, but that's only half of this story. In 1927, the tea rooms were turned into a working men's club. In turn, that building would become a nightclub called Shades. It was pulled down in the 1990s and replaced with these houses. Now, all that remains of this quirky little piece of Croft's history is the name of the street. Personally, I'd have called it Swain's Close. So as we already know, there's an old part and a new part to Croft. We've seen a bit of both now, haven't we? Now the centre of the village used to be within that old part. These days it's within the new bit, and there's a row of shops behind me that define the centre of the village. Even as late as the mid-1920s, the southern part of Croft was limited in terms of development. The only area that had any buildings at all was here. This row of shops, which now forms the central nucleus of Croft today, was once just a few large houses. The older part of the village over the river was where it was all at. When this side of the Soar developed to become the Croft we know today, shops were gradually built here to serve the needs of the growing settlement. Soon, Croft had an abundance of facilities south of the river. Not just shops, but also parks and everything else a modern village requires. Today, this row includes things like a hairdresser's, a takeaway, a general store, and even a carpet showroom. You wouldn't have seen that in the old village in the 19th century. Note the name of this street too, by the way, Poaching Street. It's a reference to the brothers who founded Croft Quarry. At the end of the road is the principal shop in Croft today, this Morrison's Daily. This used to be a co-op for several years, although its outward appearance did alter a bit over time. Interestingly, the old village also used to have a co-op as well. It also had a post office and an off-licence, and even a village hall. They were all located on a street that no longer exists. It was called Orchard Street, but the locals knew it as the Long Row. In the early 20th century, Croft Hill was the main recreational space around here. Summer picnics, as we know already, were common on that natural mound. Local children would often use Croft Hill as their playground too, and so too would visiting children on school trips. Today I can't help but think that's sort of become a thing of the past. The modern Croft village has this park and playground located at its centre, but it's nothing like Croft Hill. That said, it still provides the village with a great little recreational space. This isn't the only one in Croft these days though. We have a sports field to see a little bit later. And to give this park its official name, it's called Croft Fun Park. And if you read Wikipedia, it tells you this was opened in 2002. Okay, so from the park, we're heading down this little alleyway now. This will take us to another residential street, and it's the one where we'll find the modern primary school. Now we start a long-ish amble back towards the east again. Most people who live or work in Croft these days use their own form of transport. A lot who live here work at Croft Quarry, but the modern commuter has also found Croft to be quite useful. It's helpful then that Croft has 4 bus stops with routes into Leicester and Lutterworth. Now we come to the modern primary school, which replaced the one in the older part of Croft. This is Croft C of E, which does exactly the same job as its predecessor did. That said, the population of Croft has now greatly increased, and so now the number of pupils this educates is far greater than what the old school ever dealt with. At the age of 11, attendees of Croft usually progress to Brockington College, the secondary school that Croft falls within the catchment area for. While we're in these residential areas, it's worth noting that Croft has had some rather prominent people live within its boundaries. It's a list that includes the Canadian politician and businessman Charles Avery Dunning, who was born in Croft in 1885. The children's novelist Monica Edwards also lived in Croft for a short time in the late 1930s. Her best-known works were her Romney Marsh and Punchbowl Farm series of children's novels. Also familiar with Croft was Laura McLaren, better known as Baroness Aberconway. McLaren was the daughter of the quarry owner Henry Pochin. Both a suffragist and a gardener, it was McLaren who improved and expanded Bodnant Garden at Conwy in North Wales. The controversial writer David Icke lived in Croft for a time in the 1970s. A former footballer and sports broadcaster, he's best known for being a conspiracy theorist. And the list also includes mountaineer Simon Yates, who lived in Croft in his early life. In 1985, he and fellow mountaineer Joe Simpson made history in South America. Together, they made the first ascent of the west face of Ciula Grande in the Huash mountain range in the Peruvian Andes. After Simpson fell and badly broke his leg on the descent, Yates lowered him gradually down the mountain with ropes, but in extreme weather conditions, Simpson fell over a cliff edge. Yates was forced to cut the rope to stop him falling as well. Simpson did, though, survive, and was able to recount the story in the book called Touching the Void, which was later adapted into a film. Just in case you couldn't read that little plaque, by the way, on that little tub with the flowers on top of it, that was donated by the quarry for the Queen's Jubilee in 2012. Not sure if you could read it, but there you go. Speaking of the quarry, we are heading north now, and everything from here is north, back towards the quarry. There's just a handful of bits and bobs left to see, one of which is the sports centre, which is what we're heading for next. We've wandered into the biggest of the housing estates to be built in Croft since World War II. This contains 3 roads named Barler, Coniston and Windermere. They contain both semi-detached and detached houses, and the streets are all named after famous lakes around the UK. We've reached the recreation ground now, located in the far eastern portion of the new village, just to the south of the quarry. This is where Croft Cricket Club used to play. They were established in 1907 and their ground was always right here on the end of Winston Avenue. The club fielded 2 senior 11 teams that competed in the Leicestershire and Rutland Cricket League and a Sunday 11 team up until 2014. However, in 2016, the club ceased activity. Croft Juniors FC also play on the recreation ground on the adjacent football pitch. They're one of the largest and most successful rurally based junior football clubs in the region. They support the training of around 200 young people between the ages of 5 and 16. Although industrially the village is dominated by the quarry, there is a small industrial area on Winston Avenue which houses other offices and manufacturing companies. In the industrial estate is Croft Sports Centre. Its facilities include a state-of-the-art indoor cricket net, an indoor football pitch with a smooth non-slip surface, and even though golf is no longer played on Croft Hill, you can still get your 9-iron out here too. Croft Sports Centre has an indoor golf simulator. The building is also multifunctional because it can act like a village hall. It's often used for birthday parties and community activities. We're making our way back to the older part of Croft now, and to do that we've somehow got to get back across the railway line and the river. Handily, there's a footpath which does both of those things right here. It passes under the railway line and then over the Soar via a small bridge. Okay, we're nearly at the end. You know what? I don't want this one to end because I've enjoyed this route thoroughly all the way around the village. Every single step I've just felt so happy and positive because Croft is that kind of place. It's a happy and positive village here in Blaby. But alas, all good things must come to an end, and now it's time to cross the River Soar again as we head back up towards the quarry. A quick word for the Soar as we pass over it, by the way. It's been a while since we last saw this river. The last time we did, it was rather wide, because we were close to its convergence with the Trent. Here it's a mere trickle in comparison. At Croft, we're close to its source, but it seems nobody knows for sure where that actually is. The most likely source is somewhere close to Copston Magna in Warwickshire, but some suggest it's a pond next to the school in Burbage, just down the road near Hinckley. Others confidently say it's Foster's Pond at Leicester Grange, which is on the Leicestershire-Warwickshire border. Whatever the case, it's a river here and we have to get over it, so let's head back into the old village to see our final landmark. Our final stop on the walk is this old chapel which sits all on its own at the edge of the Croft Quarry workings. Nonconformity didn't have much of a presence here. That said, Croft Free Chapel, a union building, was constructed in 1882 to seat a potential 200 worshippers. It replaced an earlier chapel which was known as the Workman's Room. That was a nonconformist meeting room set up by the owner of the quarry for its workers. Curiously, there are carved children's heads on either side of the door and the windows. When the chapel closed, it was used as a storage space for a local business. It then fell into disuse and it had been boarded up since at least 2010. Although fire damaged inside, there were plans afoot to convert it into a private house, and as you can see, that's the current state we find it in right now. Well, what a village Croft is. I've absolutely loved my time here in this particular parish here in Blaby. I'm definitely not fed up, although that guy apparently is. And that will do us for the parish of Croft. That's been one of the best villages I've covered so far this year. I absolutely love the place. Tomorrow we're off to a much smaller village, one that can really only claim to have one landmark. It's barely even on the map. See you there tomorrow for the last one in this run. Hi folks, welcome back to Blaby for the last time this week. Now then, we started this week with a really small one out here, and we're going to finish with an equally small one as well. To get to this one, we need to be walking on a footpath which you can see behind me there. That'll take us into the main area of settlement in this one, which doesn't really have a lot. It basically just has a church, which has got an interesting history to it, and not much more. However, this has been a very important industrial site in times gone by. Let's learn why. This is Potters Marston. Potters Marston, pottery making marsh farm. Concluding this run of Blaby parishes this week, today we come to the tiny village of Potters Marston, located in the middle of the open countryside between the M69 and Croft Quarry. Potters Marston is a village, despite the fact it only has a population of around 40, who all live in the grand total of just 12 houses. The reason it's a village is because it still has its church. It was originally a barn, which became a schoolhouse, and then finally it turned into the Church of St Mary. Aside from that building, there are very few things of note in Potters Marston. The houses all form a complex around the church, and otherwise it's all farms and farm buildings. However, that name, Potters Marston, is a big clue as to what else this place is famous for. During medieval times, this was a centre of pottery production. We might be a long way from Staffordshire, which is the area normally associated with potteries, but this place was kind of like Leicestershire's equivalent. Its kiln, which appears to have operated from 1100 to around 1300 AD, created a type of pottery known as Potters Marston ware. It was distributed throughout Leicestershire from this tiny place, and today it makes up around half of the pottery that's ever been found in archaeological digs across the county. In short, it was a big deal. Although pottery production ceased here nearly 800 years ago now, it was sufficiently important to retain its presence by way of the village's name, Potters Marston. It helps to distinguish it from other Marstons we've met before. Otherwise, this was just another marsh farm. Let's explore it and see what it's like. Potters Marston sits in the middle of the open countryside between Croft Quarry to the east and the M69 to the west. It's barely even a speck on the map. The village is a small cluster of houses, 12 of them in fact, which all sit around a small church, believed to be the smallest in Leicestershire. In terms of roads, there are only two main ones. This one we're on now is the road between Croft Hill and the village of Stony Stanton to the west. The other one is Pingle Lane, off which is that main cluster. It leads to Watery Gate Lane just to the south of Thurlaston. There's not a lot of note about these lanes, to be quite honest, but at least they provide us with a scenic route into the village. So this is the footpath that will take us to Potters Marston. By no means is this a big village, nor is it industrially important, at least not anymore. The name Potters Marston indicates there was a pottery here, and indeed there was. It was in operation between 1100 and 1300 AD, although the exact dates aren't totally clear. It made Potters Marston ware, which was produced in all different shapes and sizes. Cooking pots, dishes, bowls, jugs and even lamps were made in this tiny village at one time. Further work is needed to refine its dating and patterns of distribution, but we can be totally sure that it was a major local industry. The products it created were sent across Leicestershire and beyond. It accounts for between 45 and 60% of the Saxo-Norman and medieval pottery that has ever been found in and around Leicester. One of the places it's been found in recent years was at Grace Dew Priory. Do you remember our visit to that? It was a rim shard which formed part of a cooking pot. So of course, if there was this major industrial element to Potters Marston, it makes sense there was a village to go with it, housing the workers. Indeed there was. Potters Marston can be defined as a deserted medieval village, despite the fact there are some current houses here. It has a series of earthworks formed by ridges and mounds, marking the location of houses and streets. These can be clearly seen in two fields known as the Big and Little Townships. On top of the ancient foundations today are Potters Marston Hall and a farm, both built on what was a moated manor house known to have had enormous cellars. The moat, although now drained and almost completely infilled at some point before 1954, embraces the whole of Potters Marston, including the hall and the church. The only watery remnant of the moat now is a small subcircular pond in the northwestern corner of the site, although that too has recently been dredged. Given this was a flourishing centre of industry, it probably had some stronger defensive works too at one time. Okay, so we've used the public footpath there to get from the road into Potters Marston. It's really the only way to do it on foot. I suppose you could walk up the drive, but effectively that's a private road, so using the footpath is the safer option, I think. And when you get here, it just does feel like you are in a private estate. I suppose in a way it is, and as long as you keep to the way markers on the public footpath, you are totally fine. One thing we won't be able to see while we're here is the dovecote, because that's within all the sort of industrial barn type areas that we've just walked through. It's kind of out of sight. However, we can definitely see this church, which is behind me. Now, I wonder if this is open. Let's find out. So to the church, which was originally founded in the year 1230. However, the building you see here isn't that structure, because this used to be a barn. It was built in the 15th or 16th century and served as a farm building until becoming a school and then a church. It's a very unusual history for a religious building. It was last restored in 1908. This may well be the smallest church in Leicestershire at only 38 feet long and 19 feet wide. The churchyard is now closed, but the chapel still conducts baptisms and services once a month. An important name here is Boothby. Indeed, inside this church there are several memorials to members of that family. They include slate tablets and a brass altar cross. The family also have a plot in an enclosed area at the eastern end of the church. The chapel is ministered from Barwell, although in the past many parishioners used the church at Croft. And by the way, you're totally fine to come and look at this church, even though it looks private. There are public footpaths across the village, and the church is usually open at weekends. And that's basically Potters Marston. There's nothing much more than what you've seen. The old church, which used to be a barn and then a school and then a church and then all this stuff that stands on top of the old moated site. That is Potters Marston in a nutshell. You've pretty much seen everything apart from that dovecote. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to walk back to the beginning again using that footpath we've just come down on, and I'll leave the camera running this time to show you just how small this place is. And there you have it, Blaby people. That is the first run here in your part of Leicestershire. I'll be back here very soon, I'm sure. Potters Marston is officially visited, and that means we're done with this initial run here in Blaby. 5 down, 19 to go. Join me out here again soon as we put more of Leicestershire on the map. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.